Welcome, everybody, to Learning With Lowell. Today, we're joined with Kurt Uhlir. He's a marketer, operator, and speaker. He has built and run businesses from startup to over 500 million annually in revenue. He's also been a part of teams that have IPO'd and has been a part of a number of acquisitions. Today, we're probably going to dive into a number of different areas, such as servant leadership, marketing, all those things that he gets up to. But Kurt, I just want to welcome you onto the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sweet. So I was reading through your stuff, and sometimes people have like these humble brags, like things they do where like you just say them casually, and it's like you don't realize how cool it is because you lived it. But I was reading through it, and on your profile you talked about how you were once asked by the White House to participate in and choose attendees for a roundtable to help the president with the economy. So I don't know how many people can say something like that. So I just wanted to start there and just hear and understand a little bit more of that story.
Yeah, it's been asked a couple of times. So President Trump, love him or hate him when he was in office, but Made in America, the companies that use that label, country of origin label, they were starting to do a bunch of work there around the economy for a variety of reasons. And so they asked like 10 people in the industry, hey, we want to have this roundtable, bring some business leaders together.
A quick note, Uncle Sam wants you to help make this show successful. Subscribe and become a member today.
Who should be at the table? And everybody either said the Made in America movement that I was the chairman of at the time, or me specifically. And so I got the next call, and having friends, I don't know if you have friends like this, I have friends that would make that a joke. And so I didn't believe it was real. And so I'm like, and I have friends that will go all the way in. So I said, I need a phone number I can verify publicly, and how do I get back to you? And so sure, they gave me that. I called back. I was like, okay. I got transferred. I'm like, I now believe this is a real phone conversation. What can I help with? Because not too often do you get, we have a call that we would like you to help the president for. So being able to go spend a good amount of one-on-one time. Actually, I guess you're never truly alone with the president, but then a big public thing at the White House and be able to bring about 50 or 60% of the business leaders to that meeting as well.
Was there anyone at that meeting that either you recommended or that you thought should be there that were not, like that would have represented more of a pie in America? There's one group that I always feel gets left out, just as like my feeling, is the ranchers, where they're getting undercut by like Argentinian beef import that gets brought into America, then it gets butchered, then rendered out, and so they're always getting undercut. But like no one ever talks about the ranchers and how they're losing money and all these other things. But that's always a group. I don't know if they were there or not.
They were not there. I've actually spoken at RCAF. RCAF is that group for the independent ranchers. So that's not owned by kind of the big packaging in the U.S. And so I've spoken at been a keynote at some of their talks. And so they weren't there, partially because they're excluded from that country of origin labeling for a variety of reasons for it. I'd love to have more conversations with them kind of publicly. They're a great organization for a variety of reasons you kind of mentioned. There was nobody. We had a good representation of different companies there, some big, some small. I will say the very first company, I won't name who it was, that came to my mind that I wanted to bring up, didn't meet the qualifications of the White House at the time. So their conditions were really, it was up to me to recommend. I did not choose, but to recommend people. And so they had to be companies that only build Made in America products. And then the second thing, the only other requirement was they didn't want anybody that was highly political on any ends of the spectrum, which was actually very weird for me to hear, given the White House, what I think a lot of people think at the time. And they were very adamant. They're like, we don't want anybody extreme on any of these sides. And the person that first came to mind was a CEO and founder that would have definitely fallen into the never Trump hater campaign. And to the point that I even asked, and they're like, if you can't keep that underneath, then we would not want that person to come. And I was like, but I liked what that company was trying to do more, so much so.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised over the last like 10, 15 years, and maybe I'm just young and I didn't notice this growing up or any other period of time, but companies nowadays, it's like they have to have like a banner of what they stand for. It's like, why can't a business just be a business that does good by its employees and its customers? Like I've found a number of startups, and it's like one of those, there was always a conversation about like, what do we stand for outside of just the doing a good job?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that does go back to like Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why, where I think like it's both wonderful and horrible marketing as well. Like he talks a lot about like Apple at the time, but when Apple was the challenger brand, and it wasn't like half of people had an iPhone or like I'm on a Mac right now. You mentioned you have a Mac as one of yours. Like when you're the challenger brand, you're trying like that's very different than when you have a 40% or 60% market share. And I think people don't often kind of identify that way. I mean, when you're 0.1% of a market, you're still trying to find your tribe and you're trying to get endearing to them. And so whether it's politics or social or even camping, like you could go in none of those areas and just make camping equipment. Well, there's people that want to go glamping and they want to stay in a yurt that's been there for the last 20 years and just re-sided. And then there's people like my brother used to be that wants to take a very lightweight backpack and go out for 3 days, in the wilderness. Those are two very different types of campers to talk to. And like, if I was a challenger brand, I want to go very heavy into one of those two categories, perhaps.
That makes sense. It's a differentiating factor that sets people apart. I guess it's odd to hear like a lot of these bigger companies do it, but I guess they're just trying to be hip and have people believe in them and whatnot. Amazon's kind of a weird one where it's like they say good things, but then they treat their employees poorly. I like consistency, I suppose, in those types of things.
I mean, I do think I believe there's always hidden assumptions and things that I don't know. And so like I hear different things on the Amazon side, but like I have a sister that works there, and outside of some shifting schedules because she's in the support side, like it's a wonderful company for so many reasons. Now there's ways that I might not run part of it, but there are things I hear that are very counter to other pieces. And so I try very hard to go with what I know is fact versus what I
That's
hear.
fair.
But I think that's a big deal though for companies and just individuals. Like it matters to be like, is what I'm hearing a biased opinion, whatever it's at, or like what do I see in actions? Like how often do you talk to a friend they've gone to work for a company that said all the right things about what culture was like, and then when you get in there, that's completely different. And I mean, I try like from a culture perspective, working with companies like let's establish what your culture is, but things that people could validate by action, not what I say, not what you say. And that's a mind shift for a lot of people because we're so used to like somebody basically putting on the resume, I work well with people. Like you work well with people, that's going to be seen in your superhero stories you tell. If a company says that they're high growth, like is that really there? Like I want to have something that says we believe in healthy confrontation, because that's going to be a conversation that you're going to have some very different interviewing conversation, but also then anybody on my team can hold me accountable to if it doesn't feel healthy later on, because there's no way to avoid confrontation. But like some people actually, I've had people say, I don't want to take the interview because you guys believe in confrontation. Well, that tells me a little bit about the person too. I don't want to even engage in that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think confrontation is healthy, like you're saying, and it's necessary. I think sometimes people blow it out of proportion. If I think we should go left and you think we should go right, there's an inherent confrontation. Now, how are we going to talk about the right way to go forward? We talk about the vision, then we decide which one has the best merits to get us there, etc. Like that's still a confrontation, but there's like, are we nice? Are we respectful to each other in our opinions? Like that type of stuff's really important. I hear you as well. Like that, I can't imagine an environment that doesn't have confrontation. That seems kind of odd. Yeah, but
I don't think you can avoid confrontation if there's people involved. I mean, in the example you gave about left versus right, if we're going hiking and we're at that Y, well, we can have the confrontation now, or we can have the confrontation a mile down the trail or 10 miles down the trail, and like that's going to be unhealthy confrontation at that point. If I continue to think that, well, you had us go left and we're getting farther and farther away, well, that's going to build the confrontation. So when it comes up, it's going to be much more difficult versus having that up front. The same thing happens, with me and my wife at home, with kids, with work topics. I mean, none of us have like full insight into what the future, but I'd rather have that discussion up front so that it doesn't like healthy confrontation isn't really challenging. It's a conversation, as it should be a lot of ways.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an in-house recruiter for a large corporation, and I was curious what are the things they look for, and they were like, well, we want this ability. So I asked them, do you have this ability? And they say yes, and then I sent them on to the next person. I was like, so if I'm a liar, all I have to do is say yes, and I get in there. It's like have a conversation. I feel like we had a conversation about it, but like I feel like if it is just yes, no, yes, no, yes, no to these 5 criterion, I don't really feel like you're getting anything from that person that separates them. And at the same time, like you want them to understand about your company as well. Like if you're just like there to check boxes, like they could have just done a Scantron or like a Q&A type thing and moved about their day. But since then, I've talked to a number of recruiters, and a lot of them are that way. They're just like they like pattern match, and they just look for like true false statements. Like is this there? Is it not? they don't look for those stories to really show, can they work with like you can say, like you said earlier, like I work well with people, but it's like, all right, let's dive into like a tangential story that would reveal that to me. I always like to find ways to ask a question that isn't obvious what I'm trying to get out of it, so that so we can just have a conversation about it, but I can learn everything I want to learn at the same time, and then open up the conversation for a back and forth. The most fun interviews I've ever had for hiring for my own companies are been ones where they ask questions. It's more of like a dialogue like this versus someone who's just kind of like. But at the same time, I think a lot of places condition people to just sit there and say the right things and jump through these hoops, etc. But there are people that were just very much themselves and showed me who they were. And while it wasn't like they didn't have the technical skills or whatever, they weren't a good fit, I still like forward them on to someone who would like them, because I have a sense of who you are, and I interview 1,000 people, maybe only like 100 or so has that type of strength of character to be just open about what they're looking for and who they are, etc. So I always try to like help people around getting where they want to go, but it is rare. And anyone listen in, I'm sure like you have horror stories of people just being like, "Well, do you have this ability?" Or they or like even a company that has all these values, but that doesn't back them up. I think a lot of times when I'm building something, I don't think a value is something you state. Like I feel like you value what you tolerate. So there are a lot of places that say I care about A, B, and C, but then if you just work with them a little bit, it's like, well, what type of behavior do they really tolerate? That's what they really value. Right. Like if you're an outside performer and etc., that type of thing.
Yeah, well, and a lot of times I think what we're looking, or at least I'm looking for in people from the team and from individuals, I mean, there's going to be a conflict between the things. Like three of the big areas that I tend to hire for from a culture perspective is, we mentioned healthy conflict. I also want a bias towards action. And so the other thing I want is strong opinions held loosely, which does overlap with the healthy conflict because you're open, but it also means you're going to show up if you have a problem on your team or something in your job. You're going to show up and say, here's the issue. And I want you to have thought through enough to have a very strong opinion about, to your example, we're going left. And we may have a healthy conflict, talk ourselves into we're going to go right. But those three things, like that's also a conversation a lot of times when you get with people about, okay, these three things could be competing for what we're both going to see. And so to your point, if I just always yield to, well, we're going to keep the peace rather than be peacekeepers or peacemakers, that's very different. A peacekeeper means there's no conflict. Well, no, I want a healthy conflict so that, hey, we can have super strong opinions and let people struggle through. Like most people will be able to discuss that. Now, not always can they discuss it from a work perspective, but sometimes somebody will bring up an issue like at home. Like I had somebody, I mentioned healthy conflict, and his response was, "Oh, you mean pre-fighting?" And I went, "What do you mean?" So him and his wife had used the term, like, "Hey, how do we want to raise our son? What do we want to do budgeting wise?" And so they're like, if we pre-fight, it's a discussion so that now when we've been saving money for do we buy a new car or do we go on vacation or do we pay off part of the mortgage? We've had the discussion 5 years before we got that money in the bank. And so for him, it'll be a fight later, but if we talk about it and agree now, then the decision's made before there's any conflict that kind of comes in. And I was like, yes, I would not call it pre-fighting for some reasons, but like that's a great way to bring it up and to think about it.
Yeah, that structure, it can be seen in so many other different avenues as well. Preventative medicine. If I was in and out of the ICU and ER at one point in my life, and if you're in that scenario, they're catching you right before you hit the ground. But if there's preventive medicine, it's like, oh, you're starting to stumble, they can come in and help you out, do the things that are right. And it's a similar situation. Like you're pre-fighting any potential illnesses or larger things going on right there. And it is interesting because I get to talk to so many different people to see like there seems to be like themes that just work in so many different arenas. And but I know a lot of people who they'll say, I don't have that skill, I can't translate it over here. And it's like, well, what's the structure of that skill? How do you use it? Because like the person in their personal life, pre-fighting, you can use that in business, you can use it in many different places. Probably not in the surgery room without some like advanced training, but like 90% of the time you'll be able to apply a skill differently, which is really interesting. But I think that falls within your category of servant leadership. This like managing up or looking for opportunities to help other people. One question I have for you, I was reading Walter Isaacson's biography on Steve Jobs. I think it was in there, or I was reading this elsewhere, but that I think Donald Trump was also a person who does this, where they like things to be consolidated to like a one pager. So like the people below when they talk or like in a meeting, they have everything consolidated to like the smallest bit as possible. Like I know Steve Jobs didn't like slideshows, for instance. He just wanted people to like speak from the heart or be like really consolidated. And I like that idea of people coming, they do their work and they consolidate it to a level where we can just have like the high level, and I trust that they've done the work so they can like give me good opinions, or like everyone else in the team could like, hey, I did research this component. Here's my thoughts on it. Here, this component. These are my thoughts on it. We can kind of a la carte the solution together. What do you think about, what does that look like with the servant leadership? How do you see that working, or how do you see about communicating in group settings like that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think it starts with actually work early on, is that everybody in the organization needs to not only understand, which most companies don't have frontline people especially do this, but understand what the outcomes the company is trying to accomplish and why. I was talking with somebody earlier today who's an executive coach with mid-sized companies, like 10 million to about 50 million a year in revenue. And he was like, it is so hard for him to go in and teach like financial literacy so that like everybody in the organization, sometimes even the CEO, understands what like net profit looks like before taxes. Because if you ask frontline people, how much does this $10 million company make? And they think like 50%. They're like, no, it makes 7%. Before taxes. So it's like 3% by the end of the day or something. And like being able to like make sure individual people realize here's the outcomes we're trying to accomplish. And here's how you as an individual are trying to accomplish that. That has to take place before I think somebody can really consolidate and come forward with, hey, here's the decision, here's that where we're looking to invest. Because you have to give that explanation and bring people along so that they're empowered enough to actually know, hey, if we go left versus right, here's how that's going to impact my team or me or the company reaching our goals in the long term. And so many companies, they don't do that. They just assume, well, I mentioned that at some conference and it didn't take place. Like, no, like you have to bring your team on board about what those outcomes are so frequently that if you're married, your spouse should be annoyed with hearing it from you, because like, that means that she's overheard conversations one-on-one sometimes or vice versa, where like I've been continuing to bring it up to my teams over the last 5 years, some cases. Like at that point, I'm starting to break through with the mass of the team when they're on the larger companies that I work at. And then the consolidation is great, because without that, I need more details a lot of times to know, why do you believe that this is the right choice? Because I don't actually know that individual knows where I'm trying to take the company.
Yeah,
I think too often leaders, this is where you mentioned about servant leadership. I think too often leaders, they may not mean to be, but they're wanting to micromanage. And so I don't let you into my entire vision about where we're going because I want to be in control. And so like, I'm never the smartest person in the room. I think that our milieu of different ideas, especially from different backgrounds, is always going to come to a better result. But that means I have to let you know where we're trying to go. And to some degree, I think everybody, including the person that's answering a phone at a front desk for places there are places that you need to have brick and mortars for, they need to understand like what the company's doing and why we're trying to get somewhere. And if not, like, you're never going to be able to get to the point where somebody could come to me with a real, kind of Steve Jobs point, hey, here's the one page of what I think we should do.
Yeah, that's interesting. The CEO of Google does the same thing. Every meeting he goes to, he'll say, this is our vision for our company. This is how this meeting is going to fit into it. Let's dive into it. I think that's really interesting. I've seen people where you could say it, like you could say at the beginning, so I do a lot of software engineering, and there will be meetings where we'll say, hey, here's the vision. And by the next sprint, like the next period of time where we're doing a development of something, the people forget what the vision is because they're just like so in the weeds on what they're doing. And so restating it is like so key. And there was a friend of mine who's working in a biotechnology company to develop a pharmaceutical, and they were trying to empower their team to do more, to do their best, essentially. And I was like, well, do they understand the vision? Like exactly the questions you were asking. Do they understand the vision? Like, how certain are you that they understand? So, well, I think they do. It's like, okay, say what the vision is, and then ask everyone how their work fits into the vision. If they can answer that, like help them see where it fits in. And they started doing that. And like they said, like production exploded after that. And they did like 6 months in a couple of weeks. As a leader, I always ask myself, if I was being led in this way, would I like that? Do I want someone to come in and say, Lowell, I want you to do this, and this is exactly how I want you to do it? Now, I would love a conversation where it's like, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. go, this is kind of your area that you're in, go have fun with it and come back with a plan, and then like let's critique it together as a team. Like that's more fun for me. I think that's also how Jocko Willink describes it in Extreme Ownership, where they'll have a plan, but they never really tell the subordinates how to do the plan. They're like they do their half to, and then they manage up to him, and then they kind of work on it together. It's like I said, there's kind of like these themes on how to do things well, and there is a muscle memory to it, because it feels antithetical to how people think you should lead, where it's like, I'm in the front, everyone's got to listen to me and all these different things. It's like, I don't know. I think you should listen more than you speak when it comes to leadership.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into also like knowing that I stumbled into servant leadership, but I really stumbled into it in a way that, so I ended up with, we spoke a little bit kind of before we got started, but about I ended up with a mentoring relationship with Judson Green, who was the president of Disney Entertainment or Disney theme parks and the CFO of Disney as a whole. And when he came to our company, and this was a little company, we were doing about $85 million a year in revenue. By the time I left, we were doing 1.44 billion. When he came in to become our CEO, he thought it was kind of his retirement gig, but he still treated it like it was the big boy Disney at the time. And he came in, and I was a new out of school, just finished my master's, and he came to me and he had approached 9 other people that were all kind of at my level in the organization around the world. And what he came to me was to say, I don't remember the exact wording, but was he knew that at most companies, and he experienced it at Disney, every time there's a report out that goes up, there's unintentional lying. Sometimes there's intentional lying, but usually people are biased, wanting to show the good and not the bad and the problems. And what he realized was, and his solution was, he came to me and a couple of others, and he said, one, I will come to you and ask you questions about what's going on in the organization. And I want complete honesty. I don't want your opinion. If I do, I'll ask you for your opinion. I want to know what you see factually is happening. And 2, if you ever tell anybody about this relationship, we're done. Well, I knew who he was. And so all I knew was, that's really cool. It was like within 2 years that it was only me and one other person did we still have that relationship, because people would tell others about the relationship, or he would realize, well, now you're starting to give your bias in there, and he couldn't self-correct. And so that developed into something else later. But it's amazing as I look back, and I was somebody with 20 plus years of experience and in hyper growth companies where he was correcting for that. Like he just knew a lot of the bigger organizations get, as the CEO and at mid-level managers, you don't always know what's actually going on. I approach that differently now from servant leadership by saying, I want to provide that out. Here's the outcomes we're trying to accomplish. I want the communication channels so that we're having the conversations much more regularly. I shouldn't have to self-correct for implied lying that's going to take place when you manage up. No, I want to know what's actually going on. The frontline person who's like working at a fast food, taking orders, they're going to see things that regional managers would never know is holding back the business. So how do you get that information? That's what Wendy's doesn't do. That's what Burger King doesn't do. You go to a Chick-fil-A, you go into Freddy's Burgers, which has been growing pretty. Wow, they push through so many more people than other organizations, because they take a different approach.
I just watched this movie on Disney Channel about the Flaming Hot Cheeto, and how it was a guy who was a janitor who thought this whole thing up, and then called the CEO, who made a tape about, hey, act like a CEO and have some ideas. And in between him and the CEO, everyone at a certain point just started yelling, like, who's this guy? He started yelling at like implied lying and all these different things. And and the CEO had to like come in and like kind of correct it just with his behavior. And so it's interesting to see what change you can have when people are treated like people versus just cogs in a machine. I think that's the cool thing about all this technology we have, where people can be brought up to a level where they can really bring out the best in them, like bring out the best in themselves and apply it to something. I think, I don't know about the majority of people, but I know like for the people I talk with and myself, if I go through a day and I feel like I didn't do anything, it's like, man, that's a shitty day. Like I want to do something. Like I'll even be like, did I do anything today? I'll take 5 minutes. I'll find like, what's a concrete, constructive thing I could do that feel good about today, and I do something about it. And so there's a lot of places that I feel like waste people's time with like look busy or all these like meaningless things, versus this is our goal. What it is. Think about like the Flaming Hot Cheeto idea or the Purple Elephant idea, or like all these different Seth Goden type concepts that I've been reading about. I always tell people, like, what's the most selfish thing you can do? Treat people well. That's it. Yeah. Like if you're like the most evil person, just treat people well. and then like you'll benefit you even more. It's like and then they just look at me like that doesn't make sense. I don't know, but just try
Well,
it.
and trust people. I mean, trust
Yeah.
people when their actions show who they really are.
Yeah.
Trust that as well. I mean, give them grace. I mean, I screw up all the time, but also when somebody repeatedly shows you who they are, believe that. But I believe my job, like the two things. If I can summarize any job that I have,
Yeah.
my job is one, to help the company achieve its goals. And kind of with that, but you might make it second, to make my boss successful in accomplishing the company's goals. Well, that when you believe that, there's no excuse for you having a bad boss. You can go get another job. I mean, after 6 months, you're still at the same company. You still think you have a crappy boss. Well, that's now your fault, because your job, if you could have gone and got another job, your job is to make him or her successful as long as you're there. And if they're not the person you want to work for, then you can go somewhere else. But when I'm here, my job is to make my boss successful. And so that means that he or she needs to know what I'm doing. I need to, some cases that also means, this is something I struggle with all the time. I need my team to know what I'm spending my time on. Maybe not on a every single hour, every day basis, but my team needs to know, teams need to know what I'm doing so that they can decide the same way leveling up. Hey, Scott Trowbridge on my team, his job is to make me successful, accomplishing my outcomes for the company. So to do that, sometimes he has to step up and go, I see you spending time on this. I can do that. Well, if I don't provide that level of transparency, no, they never have the ability to do that. And then they also can't grow as well, because I'm hindering their growth a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like there's accountability systems in how you think. I think some of the most detrimental things you can do is, I think everyone's experienced this. There's like, when you're at a group assignment, either at work, at school, and there's like one person who doesn't do any work, man, does that really wears you down. And just having a level playing field for everyone to be appreciated for their actions and be accountable for them, even on the leadership side, on the management side or whatever. I think that says it with action, like you've been saying, what can't be said in words. I think a lot of times people feel, I've worked with people that, like, it took 6 months to just watch them to see how they only say the nice things, because you don't really see what they're doing sometimes. And then it's like, all right, well, course correct, and then move forward. But the times where you can show with action the things that you believe, that it's such a world of difference.
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, you're making me think about, like, there's this huge pull from a lot of companies now to make people that had shifted to work from home or work from anywhere, forcing them back into the office. And there's this underlying, it's just a false belief in most of them. They think that because people are in the office that they're productive. I mean, I don't like monitoring software for on people's laptops, but when you look at the studies from those companies, or you do a short-term thing in that, like, you look and see everybody that shows up to an IBM office, you go look where they're productive, where they're actually spending time, and like the amount of time on eBay and Facebook and other places. I mean, it's appalling for people usually. I mean, I've done that checking on myself as well, where I'll install a piece of software for myself, and I'm like, oh, I'm not as productive as I thought. Well, people think that just because there's a bunch of people on these cubes at Home Depot that they're working. Well, no, like, for me, I'm using Trello, Asana, Shortcut with our engineering teams. So whether or not you and I are in the same office, or whether or not we're remote around the world, I get to see what you're doing. You get to see what I'm doing. And then, to your point, like, you don't have that, hey, it's a project and this person, these 5 people, I've just sat off by the side. You get to see whether they're contributing or not. Now, you have to read the data well. I mean, like on the engineering side, when somebody's releasing code, one pull request is not the same as another pull request, especially when you have pair programming. But at the end of the day, if you don't have transparency, like, transparency brings accountability by itself. And if either because you're able to help coach and manage people to produce more, or people will self-select out. If it's continually showing in Trello that you're just knocking out cards and I'm not going to stay at that organization. Like, people will self-select out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just circling back on the mentorship you received, I think a lot of times people talk about how important that is to receive mentorship, to find mentors. In hindsight, what do you think it was about you that singled you out for his mentorship? It seems like in the story, it was your integrity that kept you there, but just having the door being opened, what do you think allowed him to find you?
It was a little random. I mean, we were about 1,000-person company around the world at that time. I might have been a little less random than others, but not. I don't think it was me from a choice perspective. I happen to be in a role reporting
Oh,
to a woman who reported to Saladin Khan, who is our chief strategy officer, and so I was like the only kind of brand new frontline strategist under Saladin Khan at that time. So I was kind of the random of one of one. Others were truly random within the organization because they could have had 50 people that were chosen and he chose one for whatever reason. It was the integrity and or just following rules that kept me there. Longer term, what I heard from him as we actually moved from that into a true mentoring relationship is he told me it was the humbleness of heart. I was open to hearing where I was wrong, and I would ask questions about why he made a decision. I didn't always agree with his decisions, but I would ask questions about I strongly disagree with what you just told that person on the phone. Why did you make that decision? And he was like, the why question and being open to being wrong. He goes, that's why he chose to step into a mentoring relationship with me. And that continued for years after he ended up leaving and retiring.
mhm. Is there something you gained from the mentorship that you've applied to how you mentor other people?
Yeah, it was this. I had it articulated by somebody later, but it was do for one what you wish you could do for many. He could not have had that level of relationship with. By the time he retired, we probably had 5,000 or 6,000 people. He could not have had that relationship with everybody, but he had it with me at the company and with a couple of others outside.
Yeah, I think that's why people like and discuss culture so much, because culture reinforces that microcosm of that relationship with everyone else. Like if you have, when people hear about businesses like, oh, culture, all these things, it's because that type of mentorship, if you have a good culture, would be happening all around the business with different
Right.
people in different ways. And I think that's probably why people are so focused on it, and why it's so hard. Like, it's so hard to get people to be in a state where they can be vulnerable and help each other in that way.
Yeah, and it can look very different ways. I mean, I've been a mentor out, to both in a business environment, a spiritual environment, and personal environment outside of like people that work for me. But it is so much easier a lot of times, I think, when you do work together and things. And so I got it from Judson, but I got it from somebody else. I didn't realize the some of the benefits with Judson until later, where I had this gentleman named Reggie Bradford, where Reggie hired me to kind of be him. Like any conversation he couldn't take as a CEO, he was like, I can duplicate myself and hand that off to you with direction a lot of times. And like Reggie would let me work in his office and hear the conversation with his wife where they were discussing, hey, could he work late or not? What decisions with the kids sometimes. And so I'd gotten that from Judson as well. Mentoring is great, coaching is great, but what you can do when you have that, especially formalized in a work environment, is just allow the other person to be the mentee, to be around. Hearing things is it allows conversations to take place, but that teaches so much more, I think, because they're able to see your actions than anything that you can say. And so I mean, I've done the same things. Sometimes you can do it for non-employees where, I'd helped somebody raise a bunch of money for their startup, and the CEO he was having a hard time talking to investors. So I just finagled technology so he could listen in on my conversations with investors that were my investors at the time, because there was advice I was giving him and he said some of it just wasn't crystallizing. And then he listened into 5 or 6 conversations and 2 board meetings, and he said things started to crystallize for him at that point. And I had to conference him in before I kind of got on the call as well. Some cases he'd literally pull up like on a Zoom call out of camera as well. But that requires a transparency and people willing to be vulnerable. I mean, Reggie Bradford, like the fact that I saw him get off meetings sometimes where he'd struggle with things where he cried. Like, oh my gosh, like no, the person he was talking to business wise didn't do that, personal wise didn't do that, but I got to see behind the scenes. That taught me that was a real conversation that was hard for him. When we made a decision, we made the decision to go right when we should have gone left, to your example earlier. And we knew the right decision was to build a bunch of branch offices. And we realized 10 miles down the road, that was the wrong decision. We had to fire like 30 people. Reggie cried. He didn't cry to the board, but he cried about it. Like, wow. Like that's how you teach people.
How do you think about doing that? And I think you gave some examples, maybe conference them in, or pair programming. How do you do that with the move to remote and hybrid work styles?
The same, I mean, you can do the same way a lot of times. And so if you were doing a Zoom call, you might conference a person in on your phone and let them listen in. I mean, you have to be very aware of confidentiality. You can't do that with all meetings. If you're in the big chair, you get to make some different decisions. But you have to be cognizant of that. But there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, I'm in a mentoring relationship right now where I'm the mentee, and they brought me up in Google Meet while they've had their Zoom call with their board. And so I got to still listen in on it. So depending on your machine, you might have to have two microphones for that, because sometimes you can only have one audio source unless you're using something like OSB. But either way, there's a lot of ways to do that remote as well.
What are the skills in keeping investor happy long term similar to the skills that we've been talking about so far? Like investors and the board, like I don't think a lot of people get many interactions for the listeners listening in, what it's like to deal with investors or what it's like to deal with a board of directors. I think they know essentially, boss or people working collaboratively. So what's the difference in applying this methodology to investors and the board?
It can be the same. I think it's a lot easier. A lot of times it's very much the same, and you do the same thing in actions if you've done the work prior to raising money or as part of raising money to decide on both the outcomes the company is trying to achieve and the cultural values that you would see in actions. Now, when the board and the investors are on board with those two things, it's actually really easy to have those conversations, and even presenting up, and the interaction with the board works very easily at that point. It's the problem I think a lot of companies run into is you raise money and then you decide, hey, it's one thing to change the outcomes, but it's another thing when you say, okay, I've been very hierarchical, I've hired very authoritative leaders, and now I want to go move to a servant leadership, a high achieving servant leadership style. Well, you probably hired a board that was very much decision makers as well. They liked the people that you were hiring, and now you might need to clear the deck. And that's going to be difficult decisions. If you were to make that shift, you might not be able to tell your board you're making that shift until you slowly started to change some of the people on the team. So, but I think if you've taken that high achieving servant leadership approach, and you're saying, here's where we're trying to accomplish. We'd like to get there as soon as possible. Here's the actions that I expect to see in people that will help us get there. Well, then when you talk about like transparency, well, you might share more information with the board, but it's never going to be different than what you'd share in all hands and say, hey, look, the company only makes 7%, on every dollar that's sold, and then taxes come off as well. Like, it's still the same information. It's just a different level of detail.
Yeah. And just on, if anyone's listening, be like, oh, 7%, that has to be too little. Walmart makes like 3 pennies to the dollar. And it's a giant organization. I think it was 4 pennies. It's down to 3. I mean, I think they're still profitable when it goes down to 2 or something. Like you can actually go down to 0 or even negative and still be like, somehow the accountants make it work. I don't understand that level of it. But it's like large companies that make a lot of money. It's like they make, even with, it sounds small, but if you add it times 1,000 million plus interactions, like it adds up pretty quick. But these are real numbers.
And that's one of the reasons that I love software, especially software as a service, where it's reoccurring revenue, and you might actually be able to get to an 85 or 90% margin at the end of the day. Now, when you consider all the investment and other things, but on a dollar sold today, I might be able to make 92% at the end of the day. It's less when I consider the investment over time, but like you're never going to get that happen in a retail environment, landscaping business, which was actually one of my first companies that built and sold. Like, you're never going to get to those type of margins as you go through things. You mentioned Made in America. Like, you're never going to get a denim manufacturing company that's making jeans. They're never going to see a 10% margin in their life.
Do you think, and that's mainly the operational costs, probably?
A lot of it's operational costs. Some of it's also, like with manufacturing, it's competition from other parts of the world. Where, one of the main reasons I'm a huge proponent of Made in America label, and Made in Canada and Made in Europe as examples, are because of some of the regulatory issues. As opposed to, I've worked in China extensively. I've helped build a company there, and it's like, if you're building a denim manufacturing company in the US, we care about the environment. And so there's regulations behind that. Like, despite what people may say in the political spectrum, I've never met somebody in American manufacturing that was like, I want to pollute the river next to my factory. But in some parts of the country, well, you might be able to get a T-shirt made for $2, and forgetting whether I do care about slave labor and child labor, and those things are important, but both, including those, you have the chemical issue, you have pollution issues where, like, they're not like in the US, we're considering these costs over time. And so, like, hey, I want the kids to develop well, so I'm not going to employ them in a factory at 8 years old. And so that doesn't happen in other countries. And so they make a T-shirt for $2 that might take $7 to make here, just for the T-shirt by itself. Well, that affects some of those margins as well, because as a consumer, maybe some consumers are conscious of that, and others are just looking for, well, I want a cheap T-shirt.
Yeah, I think there's an element of ownership that I think people buying things need to take when they talk about these issues, because businesses respond to where you vote with your dollar. And so if you're saying you want the cheapest thing, and the cheapest thing happens to be supply chain problematic, to say the least, like cobalt or whatever that the people are starting to learn more and more about, like these giant like holes, pits in the ground. But like fundamentally, like, you're the one who's buying, like, not you, but like people listening, like, we're buying the products that are the ones that you don't like. So, and I think that if people hit a little bit more, that's why I like labeling, like really, really strong labeling, that you can like trust it all the way down the silo, so that I know, like, hey, I'm willing to spend like 20-30% more. And it does seem like that's a trend that's going on. At one point in time, I think like up to like the 90s to the early 2000s, people were more like, how cheap can it be? And it seems that now it's more like the quality's coming back a little bit more. I think maybe you'd have a better sense of how that is, but from consumer standpoint, like, my generation seems to care a little bit more about where things come from, like we were talking about earlier, and the quality of them, and like also like who's touching them.
Yeah, I mean, it's been probably 10 years at this point. I wrote an article that was published in USA News, and so it was like it was all the reasons. It was like a list of reasons to buy Made in America. You could apply for almost any Western country, and none of them were patriotic, which is where I think a lot of people go, oh, you want to buy Made in America just because you want to, you care about the nation. Like, well, no, I cared about slave and child labor. I cared about chemicals, quality. I care about different things. And so you can get wonderful quality in non-American countries, but they're not all the same from an electronics perspective. Like, there are reasons that certain countries make semiconductors and most of the world does not, because there's a tolerance that, one, they're skilled in it, they're highly skilled in the knowledge base, but there's also the quality that's taken place in time. The same thing for cars or refrigerators or T-shirts. And so quality is a big piece of that. And so I think for part of it is, like, people now, you're right, a lot of people, not everyone, are wanting to be, they're considering those things. Some cases it's just price. When I was with a big mapping company, I do remember at Walmart having a discussion. Garmin was a huge multi-hundred million dollar customer of ours. And so at the time, a Garmin navigation device that sat on your car was like $600 or $700. And Walmart was trying to get to a price that was like unfathomable to anybody in the industry. And so we're just the data provider. We provided all the maps for all of those. And I'm in the meeting where the electronic companies are talking about, to meet those prices, these things are going to break. And Walmart's decision, or like their ethos, was, yes, but if we can hit this price point, people will have no problem just rebuying one every 2 years. That was not, Garmin was trying to make something that was rock solid, that was not going to break, that would still work 15 years later. And Walmart, I don't remember what the year was, but it was like, look, if this lasts for 2 years at this price, consumers are going to make that great decision and they'll take the cheaper one. That wasn't a cheapskate move. That was a knowing the customer move. Like, you buy a $700 device over here. If you could hit, say, $200, you don't mind rebuying it every couple of years. Well, I hadn't personally thought of it that way, but I clearly, the electronics manufacturers in the room, where Walmart, the big papa that's being able to say, here's the price point we're trying to hit. You all make the decisions on how we reach there, or how we reach that. It wasn't what I thought about. And now I think about that when I go buy a T-shirt. There's cases where on our mountain property, I just need a T-shirt to go out and work. I'll hit Goodwill for that. I'll pay 50 cents for a shirt. There's also my jeans where I might get poison ivy or I might get stung through something. I want Carhartts that, like, no needle from a bee is going to get through. and I'm still
Mhm.
going to be wearing the jeans in 15 years. Like, that's my personal choice.
Yeah. So when you talk about servant leadership versus any other model, when you go into a business and you're I think it's like really easy to dichotomize it. Like what was a business capable of doing before you bring in the system versus post the system? But maybe it's better just like build it from anew. But what if I'm like an evil utilitarian person? Why would I go with that model over a different model? Like what would be the change in outcomes that you've seen?
Growth and revenues. Like,
Mhm.
there's a lot of books on servant leadership. I won't give them to most people to read because they approach them from, it's a moral thing to do. It's a faith-based place to do. I'm a person of faith. I do believe those things, but like, there's not a, hey, you want to make money, go do servant leadership. And so there's only two books that even kind of touch on that. One is called Love Works, and Cheryl Bachelder did a book recently called Dare to Serve. And Cheryl basically said, hey, I stepped in as CEO at Louisiana's Popeye's Kitchen, and we were losing money and on the path to bankruptcy. And we became a wildly successful, from a monetary perspective, company because she pivoted the company to servant leadership. And so it's like, I look at this place where you mentioned muscle memory before, building hyper growth companies. I'm on my second hyper growth company. A hyper growth company is, how do you grow like 50x, 100x, in just a couple of years? Like, that's a hyper growth. And we took that company from 85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion in 10 years. That's hyper growth. And so the only way that that's really possible is with servant leadership. And for me, that ends up being, you can look at an organization and say, who's making the decisions? Is it the boss that's making the decision, the higher ups that people have to keep coming back? Or are most of the decisions intentionally being made further down in the organization? And very often the new ideas are coming from frontline people. Like, that's the real flip of things, where the people that are trying to solve the day-to-day problems with customers and for services, do they feel authority to make decisions or to raise problems that could be more efficient?
Yeah, I think when the Soviet Union fell, there was like the military people were like meeting and actually seeing how they both ran the different systems, and the Soviets were like, how can you Americans get so much done without people watching each other? Like so apparently in the Soviet Union, like there would be like someone from the Politburo, like it's like the Communist Party function thing. There'd be like a guy for the officer, the guy for the sergeant, the guy, like there would like be people assigned just to watch people. So like it was like double the size for everything to get anything done. Where in America, it's like, all right, guys, we're gonna go do this, and ladies, we're gonna go do this, and then like 10 people just go off and do it. Like, how do you guys get stuff done? Like, there's just such a dichotomy. And it does feel kind of like that to an extreme in what you're talking about, when people are able to know the vision, operationalize the details, and then see what's happening on the front line and make decisions without a Stalin-esque person sitting by their side, like forcing them, go faster. It seems like things go faster on their own, which is just an interesting historical aside. When you talk about hyper growth, is there certain foundations that you need to have to start achieving it? Is it like, can you start hyper growthing when you're at like $250,000 in sales, or do you need like 10 million X amount of customers, a certain base of people? Like, what are the criterion of foundations to allow you to do hyper growth?
Great question. I don't know if there's a pure dollar figure.
Yeah.
I would say it's usually easier. So somebody who's starting the concept earlier, but you have to have your product market fit solved. Whether you're a real estate company with real estate agents, or you're building software or data, you have to know the problem that's you're trying to accomplish, and have a solution that your customers go, that's the solution. You can't every startup is trying to be hyper growth, but they don't have product market fit. Most companies that have raised, a Series A, sometimes a Series B, they don't have true product market fit yet. They'll claim they do a lot of times, but they don't. And so you have to have that product market fit down. Bigger is going to be better. It's going to be hard for a $250,000 company. And some of that is just from a diversification perspective. I think what most companies forget, what most leaders forget, is the profit first mentality. Like, at the end of the day, revenues are blood flow, and profits are what allow you to continue investing. And so if you don't have revenues growing, well, it's hard for you to really have growing levels of profit then. And so you have to have profit to be able to say, look, let's keep solving this. And so foundationally, like, I always want to, wherever I can get a wonderful 10x ROI. Hey, if we have this and we put more money into it, solve it. But the more capital you have, you can spin off part of the company to almost try to put the rest of it out of business. We did that at this company called Navtech, where I started 26 internal companies. And part of it was we had an R&D shop, and part of their job was to just advance the current technology. And then there was our inventions. And our inventions were, how do we put everything else out of business, including the R&D efforts? And so that was like a side gig kind of we had internal. Like, you have to have enough revenue to be able to say, hey, let's take hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and just go focus on pure moonshots that are going to just go gangbusters if they work.
How do you know when you have true market fit? I hear this a lot as well.
Yeah. And for me, it's being able to repeat the problems to your customer that your product or service solves, tell them what your product does, and or how it solves that problem. And what you hear back from the customer is, that's right. They don't bicker on price, and they go, that you tell them the problems and they go, that's right. That's what my life is like. And then I go, well, here's what we've solved, and again, it could be in real estate, and here's how we work with you to help buy and sell properties, or it could mean here's our SaaS solution. And people, when you tell them what your product does, you tell them how you work with them, and they go, that's what I'm looking for. Like, it's almost not selling at that point, because to me, selling is me trying to get you to go through the list of features and be like, well, there's a bunch of things, I'm just like those, but I'm in front of you, or we're a little bit better. What I'm looking for in product market fit is, here's what your life looks like, here's what I solve, and they go, that's it. How can I give you a credit card?
Yeah, I look for examples of, I think of it like unintentional product market fit, like things where when they're retooled work really, really well. And I was recently reading about how I think it's Home Depot. They had this sign that said, I forget the name of it, so this is not going to sound well, but the basic concept was, spray this on spray this on anything, come back in 30 minutes, you can wipe it off. It's like scrubby bottle clean or whatever. And people would just line up. They would sell out by the gallon all the time. And but apparently it's just bleach. But like, it was just packaged in a way where people were like, that's exactly the problem I had. Like that exactly solves the problem I have, which is like, I don't want to like sit here and scrub. I don't want to spend like all this time like scrubbing something clean. If I could spray it, come back, that's such a nice conceptual idea. So apparently it just sells like hotcakes all the time. And I look for examples like that where like it's just a sign and people just like sell it out, but it's like it's the same product that doesn't sell well normally. It's like, how does that change? Like what are people hearing and seeing that solves the problem for them, that makes that work well? And so that's one that has product market fit in terms of like flying off the shelves for people who just want to like relaxedly spray something, have something clean, and then move on with their day. But are there other examples or other examples of identifying product market fit in your other companies that you could talk about, unless it's like the exact same formula that you use that you just described? I always try to find like other ways to let the like crystallize the ideas.
Yeah. So, I think it does for me. If you solve something and you make something technically better, if you and I could go to a lab and make a CPU that was twice as fast as anything else, it sells, no question. Mm-hmm. That's different than coming and finding a problem that somebody has and then creating a solution for that. And so one of the examples that not from one of my own companies, but I was a coach at Georgia Tech, where we brought about 70 companies through this deliberate innovation program. And so one of the guest speakers that came in that was friends of the program was one of the inventors that came up with a swiffer. And so the problem that they were trying to come up with wasn't something that I ever would have gone for. I mean, anybody that's ever used like a swiffer or one of the knockoffs, like, you can always vacuum or mop a floor better than you can with a swiffer. Their thing was, they knew on that one specifically that said, look, people have like a very small amount of time, like 2 to 4 minutes, where somebody's coming over and like that's their level of cleaning. And so what they were looking for was, what could we build from a product perspective that would allow somebody to like go, oh my gosh, my in-laws are coming over. Oh my gosh, my boss is showing up, or friends are bringing Billy over. That I could from that moment walk to the closet, do some level of visible cleaning, and put it back all within 4 minutes. And the Swiffer ended up being the results out of that. And I think about that from a technology perspective, where it's like, you step into things. I built one of the earlier influencer marketing platforms. Well, did it need to be the best influencer platform that ran the best, most productive campaigns? No, we actually started to build it to make the best campaigns out with influencers and other marketing partners. And people were only kind of like, okay. And so when we talked to companies and we said, like, you're paying us for this, but I see you're not using it. Like, you had no problem writing a very large check for this, for this enterprise software we gave you, but you're not really using it, but you keep paying us, so thank you. People had this desire. They said what they really wanted was, as a marketer, the brands were always looking for, they wanted more. Yeah, we have 200 influencers we work with. What I want is 500. What I want is 1,000. Well, for me, the logical part said, yeah, but if you use our tool with the 200 people you have right now, like, you could double revenue. What the customer told me was, yeah, but the problem that I actually want to solve is I want more influencers. So we built up part of the platform to basically go identify more influencers. And that's what people cared about. And so I think too often founders get in a position, myself have, where I try building something, I try solving the problem I want to solve, rather than listening and say, oh, wait, what I want to solve, you don't actually care about, or you only somewhat care about, as opposed to what do you actually care about? And when you start to unlock that, you then start to get into that hyper growth possibility that much more.
It's interesting. And this is, you're pre-fighting all this before you file for LLC or C Corp. You're talking to a number of customers just to get a sense of this. I'm just
you can do it before, you can do it during as well. So that
yeah.
on the influencer platform, we had actually raised money on the first bit that I talked about by me going. I had built a lot of software, but going to a handful of companies that we had worked with trying to find a problem. And when I told them, I told the first CEO of the company, I said, well, here's this platform we're building. I don't know exactly what the pricing is going to be. $5,000 for access to anything we build over the next 6 months. I promise I'll get you something within 30 days. And when without missing a beat, he said, well, can I give you my credit card? I knew at that moment that I should have put an extra 0 on the end of the platform price. So in conversation 2, when we were going back, again, I didn't have software yet. Conversation 2, I did add a 0 to the end of it. And we got pretty close to that at every negotiation. Well, I did that with 3 customers before we had software. We raised a bunch of money. We built that platform. We had customers doing really well with it. It was only after that we actually started listening to customers, and they find out there was something that they were more excited about over here. But that works. It works the same way. I think I work a lot in real estate right now. I'm not a real estate agent. I tend to be an operator, a technologist. I'm a scaler. I come in and I find processes and I make things work better. When I talk to the real estate agents that are making just great money, they part of it is they talk through conversation. They're really skilled at walking through conversations with people, at least those that are buying homes. There's lots of types of properties where they're having more discussions about what people want from an emotional perspective, what outcomes, than just, oh, you want 5 baths or 5 bedrooms, 3 baths within this area. That's part of it, but they're uncovering what are people's desires, and they're really good at navigating that part of the conversation.
It's interesting, especially with I think it went from like a buyer's market over the last year or so to I don't even know what the market is in terms of real estate. I just keep looking at it and like seeing the points go up and not understanding it too much. What is the real estate market like? I guess in Georgia, where you're from, if that's not a doxing information, but is this looming recession affecting things in a really negative way in terms of real estate agents and people who are buying? Like, what's it like?
I mean, I have no real personal opinion on that. I mean,
okay.
Opinion. I'll tell you what I see locally is like my neighbors across the street, like the number that they're under contract right now. What they're under contract for is almost obscene compared to what a house just down the street sold for like a year and 2 years ago. So Georgia's people are moving here and prices are going up, as at least feels like it. I think, at least my understanding is, so much of the buyer's market versus seller's market, it comes down to inventory at the end of the day. I mean, you always have people that are that they are just having to buy and sell because of new jobs, or they're moving for elder care, or they're moving into elder care, and so they're having to sell a property, divorces and whatnot. And so there's a certain number of transactions that just always have to take place. And then there's a lot of us that we just need to live somewhere, and what new properties are being destroyed or built every year. And so a lot of it, that is just an inventory perspective as well. I mean, whenever there's people are much more skilled than me. Whenever you have interest rates change drastically, that affects people's ability to buy and sell. But that's also why it's like, I build technology. I happen to be able to do things like get companies to outrank Zillow and other people that are out there. And like, that's my part of it. I would still, like, now having been in there, I hear about people that were trying to, they try to buy and sell properties by themselves to cut out a real estate agent or something. I'm like, I've seen, and I know enough agents, productive agents, non-productive agents. I'm like, I would never purchase a property or sell a property without having a real estate agent, because like, it's not just a negotiation. It's that not what's happening in the market. They're like, I just can't know that. I mean, I have a master's in financial engineering. I can take the most complex financial equations and code them out at an enterprise level, or I could when I graduated. Do I manage my own money for retirement? No, I have a gentleman with Ron Blue Trust that he manages our money, because to do that well, you need to do that every day.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was reading as well that you I think it's EXP, which I forget which one is the one that you got to outrank higher than Zillow. I was just curious what you did to do that, because like, I go on Zillow because it's fun to like see what everyone else is doing or how things are selling for and stuff, because sometime in the next 5 years I'd like to get a place.
Well, we don't outrank Zillow for everything, but I do work by day. I work for EXP Realty, one of the largest real estate companies in the US and definitely the world. And so, yeah, it ranks for hundreds of thousands of keywords. I mean, there's like 5 million buyer related terms across the US. And so it's different than if I'm trying to rank your personal website or my website. Like, hey, I have kurtuhlir.com. I write a lot about servant leadership. What I do there is very different than like for an EXP or a Home Depot or others, where you're having to build technology. So it's called enterprise SEO. Some of it is similar to how we might try to rank our own sites, but there's a huge technology aspect, and it's very different, because instead of trying to rank for dozens of keywords or maybe hundreds, we're trying to rank for millions of keywords. And so you just can't do that without technology coming into play. And then where there are things like link building and content writing, the scale is just completely different than what I do for my personal site.
Is OpenAI, ChatGPT, any of that stuff coming in, the AI new tools coming in to make your job easier or more complex?
It's some of it's easier. I mean, I mentioned I'm a scaler. I'm always looking for how I can do more, better, faster, but the more and better has to go together. And so there's a huge number of people within marketers and people that think they're marketers but aren't, that are like, oh, now that you have ChatGPT or Jasper AI, there's a whole bunch of those, and they're like, we can fire our huge content team and we can just pump through a whole bunch of articles over here and spit things out. Well, on a personal site, if like you and I were trying to do an affiliate site, we might be able to do a quick rank, make a bunch of money, sell it off. But I would never do that with something like Home Depot, where you have this huge brand authority and you're trying to rank, like I said, for millions of visitors on a monthly basis for the next 20 years, because you might be able to fill Google for a little while. But like even there, Google stepped in and said, hey, we care about helpful content. If you use ChatGPT to regurgitate what else is out there, that's not helpful to most people. There's some level that it is, but when I have somebody who's very skilled from a writing perspective, that knows the area and that knows how to use AI tools, that's where they can go faster. Some industries and some types of content, maybe I can have our average writer go 30% faster than I could have 2 years ago. Some cases I can have them go 300% faster or more. But I can't just take away the writers. And so in some ways it's making my life a little bit, it's making my ability to go faster because I know how to use it wisely. And there's a little bit of it's making my life a little bit easier because there are so many people that are doing it poorly. They're trying to game the system in the short term. There's a lot of crap content that's out there. And so in the medium and long term, those of us that know how to use it well are going to win hands down.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting factor to think about, the how to differentiate yourself, because it's really, unless you really know what you're doing, all that content kind of feels the same. It's very like, unless you like you really know what you're doing, and even then you can kind of tell when something's been written. Sometimes I like to give it like, this is how I like to write. Can you like give me suggestions on how to improve my writing? It's definitely a tool to improve and accelerate what you're doing, versus something to take over. And I think a lot of people are just letting it like take over, like you're saying, versus letting you influence it. I think it's a very powerful tool. It still has hallucinations. It still gets things wrong, and so you have to kind of know. I think someone said, I was reading somewhere on Twitter. Someone said that using ChatGPT is like listening to Joe Rogan. When it's a subject you don't know anything about, it's like, oh, this makes sense. But when it gets closer to a subject you do know about, it feels like, oh, this person's wrong, or like they're idiots. Which I think Joe Rogan knows some stuff too. But I think that's an interesting concept to think about in terms of, you have to know what you know to make it useful for yourself, versus just trusting it 100%.
Yeah, I think that like some cases does it go completely sideways? Yes, but when you know the topic. So I mentioned, like, I run this huge proprietary technology stack for actually home searches, like 1.8, 1.9 million homes in the U.S. One of the largest sites in the world in the U.S. in terms of number of active listings. Like, we were doing this huge effort to optimize our servers for things to load faster. Millions of pages on there, and so my internal team, we worked through, here's all the big categories, what we were trying to do. I fed that into one of the AIs, and basically, what have I missed? What else should I look more at? And so response, it filled in some gaps. It confirmed some of the things we were looking at. It went completely sideways and gave bad suggestions on a couple things, but also, like, it only knows as best as I can provide it. So I'm able to say, here's the different pieces of technology. I'm using Ruby, I'm using Nginx, I'm using these things, and feed that in. And like it, then I did the better thing. I asked it, what questions am I not considering?
Yeah, that's fun. And
that was great for coming back to my team and being like, oh, have we looked at these things? And some of them we had thought about, and others we hadn't. But it does, like I said, I think hands down on most topics. I mean, it'd be different. If we're writing brain surgery and heart surgery, I'm not sure I trust it for things. But on most topics, once you become a kind of a chat wrangler, you're able to do it much better. And so I don't think content writers go away. I don't think SEO goes away. But on the other side, like, when you're able to use it well, it makes things a lot easier in many cases. So, I mean, to some degree, a lot of people are using, from an SEO perspective, they're using ChatGPT and others no different than content spinners 10 years and 15 years ago. That was just taking a USA News article and rewriting it. That's largely what they're doing. And it's about as valuable.
Yeah. I haven't used it for those purposes, so I'm glad that I'm getting straight from a source who knows better, not to just regurgitate. I use it as a tool. I've been thinking about doing more writing and letting it, like, I have sometimes bad grammar, but my wife is like an English nerd to a level where, like, Shakespeare would probably be friends with her. And so she helps me improve. Like, when I first met her, it looked like I looked at my writing then, and it looked like a Cro-Magnon trying to communicate with someone. And now it's much better. So ChatGPT is like accelerating that as well. For yourself first. Oh, go ahead.
I would say with that on the writing better, Grammarly has this built into. I use Grammarly and a tool called linguix, Linguix, and linguix is a little bit better. So when I write long form content, it'll underline my Google Docs or in WordPress if it thinks it could rephrase something better. And you can choose the options for everyone, is like, make it simpler or make it better, and it'll rephrase things. And I don't always agree with it. Linguix is like, it's making things better. Help some of those more complex topics I'm talking about. How it copies in its version versus, like, it's a little messed up sometimes with where it chooses to copy paste in its thing. But that's so helpful for being like, here's a complex topic. Hey, make this more simple. Or you can also write out something and say, hey, here's an email I'm trying to send out. Rewrite this in the tone of Ryan Reynolds.
Those are fun.
And it's like, that's something that, like, a skilled writer could do, but it'll do for you in like 7 seconds.
Yeah, I had it. So I know a lot of people that like Taylor Swift, and so I was having the ChatGPT rewrite All Too Well. Which, if you're a Taylor Swift fan, having anyone touch that is like, you're gonna get attacked. And so I had it translated as if it was like Eminem or like a rapper doing it, and it's so much fun. its ability to do stuff like that. The show's name is Learning with Lowell, and I always want to know what people are learning, what they're working on personally to improve upon, what they're in a state of feeling like, oh, I don't know this thing. They're looking up at a mountain of ignorance, and they're gonna like chew on it until they get to the top. What are you working on that you don't know? Like in that framework, like that you're trying to improve upon yourself, or is there an avenue of your business that you're like, I'm learning so I can apply something in a different way? Like what are you personally developing or professionally developing that you're working on right now?
I'm usually that's a good question. Historically, I've been really good at processes, and anytime you come into a new company or a newer effort, and I'm in kind of that area now, I've found an area for trying to accomplish our goals that is working really well. But I have no idea. Like I haven't been able to stress test the system to breaking yet, and so I'm at that place where I know the iterations, the muscle memory of going through to document processes, to have all the systems with Trello and other tools to be able to help the team guide through so that, hey, somebody gets hit by a bus, we can have somebody else step in. But I'm very much right now trying to focus on how I can make that happen faster without being heavy-handed. It's having had that muscle memory. I can step in very much and being like, all right, let's talk through your day. Let's talk through what we're doing and just like document processes. And some people do that better and find a way to get the program to go 50% faster. It's really hard though, to teach that to other people. And so I have some incredible leaders right now that I'm kind of trying to learn myself. This happens with anything from target shooting, which I do, to companies, is you have to go slow to go fast. And it's a fine line between pushing them too hard versus letting them take the time that they need to not just follow directions, but take ownership and extreme accountability to improve that process themselves. And so that's kind of what I'm focused on right now. Some reason I mentioned earlier, I'm probably stepping back into a mentoring position with somebody who's been very successful compared to me, and where we have some overlap friends, and we got connected. And so literally we kind of started that conversation where I'm deciding whether or not I would like her to kind of be my formal mentor to guide me through this part of my career. And she doesn't at all do what I do right now work-wise, which is wonderful and horrible at the same time. And so it's nice to have to go through and be like, well, how does this benefit both of us?
Yeah. The one thing that I've done is when I onboard people, I have like a system set up with like docs and whatnot. So because like usually I'm working on something that's kind of complicated and there's like multiple moving parts, and so like people like to know the whole piece, like to have the vision, but then it's also like how quickly can you get people up to speed without kind of like blowing their mind, because sometimes it's like really complicated and like whatever. But so I have a process where like people learn the important stuff to the point where they can start coding or working on a different part, and then like as they go in, they do other things, and I'm like deliberately being limited so I can like make the point I'm trying to make. But at the end of it, when they actually know not only their part but how it fits into the whole system, they go through and I say delete anything that got in the way of you understanding it. Like go in and you can like delete lines, and like there's this beautiful thing that Elon Musk said where it's like does it need to be there? Delete it and see if it does anything. And he like all the new designs coming from Tesla or SpaceX are so simple, like their new Raptor engines, all these things are so simple where even the Tesla vehicles, they're just gonna be able to like make the whole chassis and stuff all together because it's so simple. And so if you can go through, it's like, was this line confusing? Delete it. How would you write it differently? And so everyone iteratively makes it better as they go through it. And so they're a part of the process. And I like that because if you ask someone like 6 months later, what did you like about it? What did you dislike about it, etc. I think they forget what it was like going through it when they had ignorant eyes. And at the same time, if it's like too much work, it should kind of flow a little bit naturally. But that's like something I've done where like I make it a little part of the process.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I find for myself, we're often very limited by what we think is our maximum capability. I have so many times where I look back and I would have told you just like 6 weeks before something happened that I was working 100 to 120% of my maximum. And then something changed. Sometimes I realize something, you delete part of a process and it still works. Some cases you just realize you realize a new way of doing things. And what I thought was 100 to 120% was really like 30%, and I've stepped up that much in productivity. That's kind of where that's a hard thing to actually, I think, teach to others as well. And so like I have on one of my teams right now, the output that I can see in the system moving through right now is about 140 to 150% of where it was just 2.5 weeks ago, where they would have said, hey, we're stress testing to kind of our max. Well, we've adjusted a couple of things. For the most thing, the only thing that they've adjusted is their mentality, I think, of what's possible. They had just kind of self-regulated to, we're kind of capped out. But in the same amount of hours every day, we're now doing 140% or more than what we were doing on a weekly basis just a couple of weeks ago. That should be unfathomable to most people. And I'm like, yeah. There's part of me also, I wanted to be like, we probably have 3 more of those iterations we can go. That's part of hypergrowth, is always saying, yeah, but how could we do this completely different? To your point, you bring up, what could we delete? What could we not do? What do we think is adding value that actually isn't adding the value that we're spending time on it?
Yeah. And then there's an element of like, you put down a system, how many people are going to feel comfortable deleting a system you put down? And so having that type of thing, I think, encourages an environment where people feel like they can do their best. Another thing is how do you do ideation of ideas? I don't know if you ever do this, but if you get everyone together and there's a process you can do where people throw out ideas, and then over the course of 30 minutes, then after that, they critique the ideas to get down to the 3 that they want to do. But that process of, as a team, if someone comes in, seeing how people can like suggest seemingly stupid ideas, but then when you think about them, there's potentially something there that will solve the problem. That seems to get people in a mentality like really quickly from like 0 to working as well as everyone else. When people can kind of, it's actually also the most fun. Like people are like, usually have a lot of fun doing that. I don't know if you do something like that, but I found that usually when I bring people in, I like to do something like that on a Friday or like a Monday, because it completely changes the tone of everything, and people want to work, like people want to do their best work, and so it's really just, can you let them see that you are what you've said you are through the actions. So I think like that's one thing I do as well.
Yeah, I've done that. It depends on a lot of times where my teams are in the world as well, and how I get ideation. And I mean, it largely from an intervention perspective, ideation, there is a big Eastern versus Western approach, but and so stereotypes may exist for a reason, but like I find people in the US that will have much more of an Eastern ideation approach. And so the difference is kind of like on the West, we're usually very comfortable throwing out very divergent ideas. And then pretty quickly we come down to what you're saying, and as then we ideate into this little area. That if I take that same approach to where like we bought a company in South Korea, and I take that same approach there, that almost freezes people a lot of times. That's interesting. Percentage of people, okay, but what works very well there, which doesn't work so well in the West to me, is you start here, and instead of doing big jumps here, you do these circles that just get spiral inwards, and so. That ideation, you still end up getting to places that are very different than where you may have started. It's just, if you go these very divergent, completely almost crazy ideas, that seems to be a very Western approach of things. Personally, that's how I tend to think. I have to go slower to go the other way. And I didn't realize it until I started working in some other cultures, how much that worked. And then now I have had a couple places in the US where I've been brought into some companies where we just work on ideation. And every once in a while, there's somebody in the room that's very quiet, and you start to ask a little bit more questions, and they're wanting to go this inward spiral to the different and so you can meld those 2 ways of thinking very well, as long as you're aware that your brain might work different than his brain.
Yeah. Does that have a name, that concept of the spiral, like the way of thinking?
It probably does in some scientific journal. I've included it in some keynotes before, because you can visualize it literally almost like that big heartbeat that narrows in. And so I've drawn it myself and things. But if it has an actual name, I don't know.
Well, opportunity to coin it, since it seems like you've been experiencing it longer than me. I'll allow you the right away on that one. What are some books you'd recommend that we check out? I'm always happy to read new things. It goes in the newsletter. What do you think we should check out?
Yeah, so there's 2 books I think everybody should read. One I did mention was Cheryl Bachelor's book, Dare to Serve. It's wonderful. It's wonderful for the stories alone within there, of the people involved. But the other one is profit first. It is, especially for people that own their own businesses. It should be required. It should be required reading to be able to file taxes your first year. Is so important for saying, for growing a business that's going to be healthy long term. But yeah, I've walked through that book with people that literally run multi-billion-dollar public companies, and it changes how they think about running that large organization as well. Even though it really is kind of focused on that woman or man that's running, a $500,000 to kind of $5 million, business. But the approach and just the concept is very healthy.
So I have noted that a lot of people in the U.S. they don't really get taught financial literacy. Would that also just be generally good? Would you be able to apply those principles to your personal life, or is it strictly for business?
I think probably it's much more business wise. I think that thinking overlaps. It's really hard for me to find anything else. There's a lot I don't agree with Dave Ramsey on if you're healthy from a fiscal perspective, but especially if you're in a relationship with somebody else, going through Financial Peace University with your partner or spouse is so helpful for having common terminology to discuss where you agree with or disagree with. And especially if you or like your wife happen to own a business, doing Profit First and Financial Peace University, which is only like 6 weeks, like doing them together just will change the conversations.
Great. And then where can people go to stay up to date with what you're working on? You have quite a lot, and we couldn't get to everything today. But where would I go? Where would other people go to stay up to date? Just the cutting edge of Kurt.
Well, yeah, two things. So on day-to-day, I worked for eXp Realty, and my team literally runs exprealty.com. And so we're listed one of the largest real estate companies in the world. And so you can actually see the results if you go search for a property or you set up like an alert for what's happening in your neighborhood. You actually will get emails sent from varieties of my teams. But on the other side, I do a lot of writing myself on my own website at kurtuhlir.com, a lot on servant leadership, both how to stay connected to what I'm doing and ask questions. I literally am writing topics now based on people going, yeah, but what about this? And I'll go write an article about that.
Sweet. Well, then I want to thank you for coming on the show today. Everyone who's listening, I want to thank you for being here and leaving the comments or write us a note telling us what you took from this conversation. I always think, how can I use this information, apply it somewhere? And that's the best way to make it stick. So please leave a comment. And Kurt, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.